Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is a breaking news update from Bloomberg. Instant reaction and analysis from our 3,000 journalists and analysts around the world.
And just moments ago, we got word from a U.S. appeals court. This is breaking. The court found the president's global tariffs were found to be illegal. The court finding Trump exceeded his authority in imposing the tariffs, upholding an earlier ruling by the Court of International Trade that ruled Trump wrongfully invoked an emergency law to issue the tariffs. This is a major development at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. With us now to discuss that and more, this evening's political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, Jeannie, didn't know we'd be talking about this, but that's the way it goes around here. The tariffs are illegal. Does Donald Trump care?
I think Donald Trump will care. I mean,
he likes to abide by the courts.
He likes to show force, right? Yeah. And the emergency powers gave him that. But he does have other mechanisms to implement some portion of those tariffs. He might not be able to do all of them with every country that he had under a tariff regime.
Yes, right.
But programs like, Section 301 and others give him the ability alone, the power of the executive branch to implement some of those tariffs. So there'll probably be a new regime put into place while they appeal this decision.
Fair enough. So over the weekend, Jeannie, these tariffs may be lifted, but in the coming hours, the administration finds an alternative, a different argument, because it's the emergency that the court is ruling on here.
That's right. And that was always suspect. Reading the statute, it was very, very hard to imagine that the court would support a declaration of an emergency. He talked about an emergency for things like the trade deficit, for instance. But yet that has been going on for decades and decades, hardly constituting an emergency. So it was always an uphill battle for the administration. They will certainly appeal. And of course, this is part of what the administration is going to have to contend with. And consumers and businesses around the world, countries around the world, this uncertainty as it pertains to tariffs. This is what the president took on when he announced this regime. And we'll have to see what the courts say as this moves forward.
So Jeannie points us back to uncertainty, and that's really what this represents, right? Even if the president finds another way to implement these very same levels of tariffs against countries, we go into a long weekend now with investors wondering what the heck's going to happen next week.
Well, but that's what these tariffs have been like since the day he started the tariff regime, right? I mean, nobody has really known how long these tariffs would last. We've had delay after delay. We've had changes in tariff rates. So this is just more of the same, with this tariff program. And you really, other than the period of time when Donald Trump issued the reciprocal tariffs that were really punitive, and the market, sort of showed him their displeasure. You really haven't seen much of a market reaction since then.
Well, this is true. Jeannie, I wonder what the reaction is with our trading partners. Why would Xi Jinping cut a deal with the United States if the court just did his work for him?
That's absolutely right. And you look at both our competitors like China, our allies, all of whom have been impacted by this. There's very little incentive now to strike a deal with the court decision. And, my friend Rick Davis, he loves to talk about the consumer sentiment, and that came out. And one thing we learned was that consumers are very, very concerned about the impact of these tariffs, much more so than, you look at some of the other things that Donald Trump has been doing in the last few months or his first 8 months of his administration. These tariffs, they are deadly afraid that they're going to impact inflation and that they're going to impact employment. So these have had enormous repercussions around the world, right here at home. And nobody, to your point now, Xi Jinping in particular, has a reason to deal until this is resolved.
Headline on consumer sentiment, and that, by the way, is your preferred index, Rick Davis, your preferred political index, I'll add, sliding in August as Americans express heightened concerns about high prices. How long can this go on for before we actually see it in the data?
Well, we're down below 60 on the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, and that's pretty low.
Okay.
And it doesn't surprise me that you now see polling data also showing that presidential approval rating is starting to dip. The Consumer Sentiment Index is is a precursor to political popularity. And I would say this has got to be alarming to the White House in advance of the midterm elections.
Boy, that's got to be true. Jeannie, you connect the dots on this pretty easily here. And if the president's tariff regime is overturned in court, if the tariffs go away, do consumers respond in the other direction? Because we've been talking about fear and uncertainty all year. At what point does this become definitive?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the president does next. Does he use some of those other options that Rick was talking about to pursue the same tariff regime? Does he pull back? Hard to believe he does, because as we've talked about, he's been committed to tariffs almost his entire adult and certainly political life. But this is overall, I believe, very good news, because the tariff regime was being put in place for reasons that were never clarified by the White House. And they were against not just our competitors, but our allies, and the impacts have been tremendous, not to mention the uncertainty. So I think the courts are doing Donald Trump a favor. I doubt the White House is going to see it that way.
You've made that point before when the courts have challenged him, Jeannie. And in this case, again, this is an appeals court upholding a ruling by the Court of International Trade. Does this go to the Supreme Court like everything else?
Oh, I don't think the president will even bat an eye to elevate this to a Supreme Court that has really handed him success after success in appeals that he's made to the high court. So absolutely, I don't think they're going to waste a minute to have the Department of Justice appeal this to the highest court in the land.
Would Republicans maybe take this up to codify the president's tariffs in legislation? That would change the picture here, too, when they come back.
Well, again, I mean, there already is a set of rules in place in the executive branch that he has options to be able to exert. Pretty much the basic tariffs of 15% across the board would be something he could probably put in place alone. So whether or not he needs additional support, I would say there are a lot of Republicans who've been pretty grumpy about this tariff regime. I mean, even though Jeannie points out accurately that Donald Trump likes it, there are a lot of Republicans who are not fans of the tariffs.
And maybe, like you say, Jeannie, the court's done a favor for him. But if Donald Trump brings this to the Supreme Court, he could have a more favorable bench, right? How does this end?
He absolutely could. He certainly has the majority on the court, although I have very much difficulty understanding how they could take what he has said is the emergency and say that it is truly an emergency. A trade deficit going on for 50 years is not an emergency. So you look at all of his public statements, once again, can work against him. Had he had an emergency to point to justify this, it may be different, but I think even a very conservative Supreme Court is going to have trouble overturning this appellate court decision.
It's interesting. This comes just hours after the de minimis exemption ended here. So people are potentially going to be feeling, although even Jared Bernstein himself thought that was a loophole that should be closed here. Right. I don't know that people who are waiting for their packages from Shein are going to see it that way, though, are they?
Yeah, no, I think they're going to, be expecting the worst, and they've gotten it already. So I don't think there's an appeal within the process that anybody's going to think is going to matter to them. And so I think certainly those people who have been under these regimes are going to be feeling like, let's just wait, see what this comes out. I mean, Jeannie's right. I don't think anybody's going to come to the table and say, hey, let's renegotiate right now.
Sure.
Because they want to see whether or not the president even has this authority going forward.
So, Jeannie, trade talks are on ice then, right?
They are. I mean, you can imagine who would be going to the table to talk until some of this is resolved. And again, this is in our national interest that this is on ice. And hopefully, in my view, the Supreme Court keeps it that way if this case does get there. Limited targeted tariffs make sense in certain situations. Blanket tariffs against our allies when we are supposed to be confronting and competing with China make very little sense. And let's just look at what Xi Jinping is hosting with North Korea, with Russia. As we go into next week, we have a competition on our hands. This regime, as much as the president likes to talk about tariffs, doesn't benefit us when it comes to our long-term national security interests.
Well, we'll find out where we're going on this one, and it might take some time here. We've got another potential Supreme Court case on our hands, but we'll go through it with the help of Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Thank you both so much. The court finding President Trump exceeded his authority in imposing the tariffs. upholding an earlier ruling by the Court of International Trade that said Trump wrongfully invoked an emergency law to issue the tariffs. The president's tariff regime, to be clear, can continue as this case proceeds.